Hi everyone, welcome to this particular program on anger management, or what I'd prefer to call how do we deal with and manage anger in our lives. How do we make sure that that anger doesn't invade other parts of our lives that affects our family, our partner, our kids and other people that we come in contact with. The most important thing that we understand about anger is that it is just an emotion, only an emotion. And I'm going to have a discussion with you about the difference between emotions and feelings and how you can actually interpret them a little differently so that you can control the behavior which impacts other people. So I do really hope that you enjoy this particular program. It's going to be educational and it's going to be helpful and it's going to give you an opportunity to talk about your situation with me either through email, and I'll put my email below so that you can contact me through the Riley Foundation, or you can actually put some comments in the comments section below and other people may be able to contribute also to your experiences around how you deal with and manage your particular version of anger and how you express it. So I really do hope that you enjoy this video. It'll be helpful to you, and more importantly, it'll be helpful for those people around you as well to know that you're actually managing your behavior differently. I hope you enjoy this. Welcome back. What we're going to discuss today is anger okay? How do I express anger? What impact does anger have on all of those people around you? And how does anger make you feel? And we're going to have a quick discussion, a really important discussion actually, on buttons and triggers and where they sit in your life. So we experience anger in a variety of ways, in different ways. And it is often unhelpful when we express it in ways which impact other people, that makes them feel afraid of who we are and how we will impact them. So we need to be able to understand it so that we can better manage it, I guess. Now, what I want you to do at this particular point, I want you to think about how do you express your anger? Like, do you yell? Do you scream? Do you shout? Do you punch walls? Do you hit other people, push people? Right? I want you to think about how that anger is expressed and the impact that that anger has on somebody around you, preferably somebody that you care about. And then I want you to think about how do they experience your anger? What is it that they see that would make them feel a certain way? So at this point, you can turn off this video and you can think about these things. How do I express my anger? That is, what is my behavior? How do other people experience my behavior? Therefore, how do they feel about the way that I'm behaving, and how does that necessarily impact them? So these are two things you need to think about. Can you just stop the video right now, write down those two areas, your behavior and how other people experience your behavior, and then just sit down and think about those for a moment and consider, is it possible that I might be able to change my behavior so that the other person doesn't feel the way that they do? Also, you may wish to think about how your anger actually impacts you. And we're going to have a discussion about this later. How do we feel? Where does it sit with us? And what impact does it have on us by behaving in certain ways or by feeling a certain feeling? So we're going to talk about that later. Just take some time to think about those two issues I raised and we'll see where we go next. Put it on pause. What I want to discuss with you now, though, are buttons and triggers. So buttons and triggers are kind of two words that are interchangeable, that we see them kind of the same. So, you know, someone presses a button or that button acts as a trigger for me. And I want us to think about them a little bit differently than the way that one would normally think about them, and this is really important. So a button is created by personal experiences and are determined by the degree to which these issues are still causing emotional pain. Now, a trigger is created by an environmental experience of which we don't have any control. So just remember, a button is created by personal experiences and are determined by the degree to which these issues are still causing emotional pain. This is my definition. This is Tony Tonkin definition. So I'm not saying that this is the way that it has to be. This is just the way I kind of have interpreted it over working with thousands of people over many, many years. So that's how I see it. Whereas a trigger is created by experiences, environmental experiences, over which we have no control. So we'll give you an example of a button. A child that grows up in an environment where they're yelled at all the time and they're screamed at and they're put down, that may make them feel inferior, it might make them feel powerless. So when someone tries to exert some power over them, they feel distressed and they want to fight back. So that's a button. Someone imposing themselves on that person means then that person may choose to respond in a way that's often pretty unhelpful, by being aggressive, by yelling, screaming, shouting, because they don't like to be put down, because they were put down their whole life. So we can understand that. A trigger, though, is a situation whereby, for example, you're involved in a car accident. So you're going through an intersection, and as you're going through that intersection, someone didn't give way to you, they slammed into you. It created you emotional distress because you're hospitalised for a while, and it was really a terrible situation to be in. So every time you go past that intersection, you remember and feel the emotions associated with that event. An event over which you didn't have any control, but nevertheless, going through that intersection triggers stuff in you that causes you to feel emotional. So that's a trigger. So what I want you to do now is to think about the buttons, those things in your life whereby you are, whereby I guess those things create an emotional response to you. So it is things like about how you were treated by others as you were growing up. The way that others have treated you and how that's impacted you when you were growing up. How things probably in more recent times create issues for you and how that affects you. So you might find that you have a partner that keeps questioning you, asking you where you've been, what you've been doing, that sort of stuff. Or you have kids that are constantly in your face, wanting your attention all the time, and that presses a button for you. And as a result of that, you might explode. You have work colleagues who just irritate the crap out of you because they ask inane questions or they don't seem to know what they're doing, whatever, and that is a button for you. So we have a whole host of these buttons. I want you to take a pause for a moment and just think about, what are your buttons? What things set you off? And then later on we'll be talking about why they set you off and how helpful or unhelpful that may be for you. So these are really important things to consider. Just want you to think about, what are your buttons? Now you may have some triggers as well, some events that have happened in your life over which you do not have any control. And sometimes we can think upon them, we can think about them as being things like, there were times when parents behaved really badly around you, and perhaps to some extent that is a trigger because you didn't have any way of responding to that. You're just a kid, for I say. So I want you to consider also the triggers that sit in your life, but also what are the buttons, those things that just sit there, that annoy you, that irritate you, that cause you to behave or think or feel a certain feeling. And what are those particular buttons? Just think about that for a moment. Put us on pause. Think about what they are for you. Okay, now that you've done that, I want you to start thinking about where those buttons sit. So where am I experiencing that? Am I experiencing that in the top part of my body? Am I experiencing that in my gut? Am I experiencing it by feeling myself becoming flushed? Am I becoming sweaty? What is it that happens at the time that that button is being ignited? And now I want you also to think about, what would I do then if I was able to remove that button? How different would my life be if that button just did not exist? That if I was able to remove it. And I guess it's really important for us to understand that I am able to remove that button. When I recognise where the button is, when I understand how to overcome that button, how to deal with it, how to manage it, when I have some sense of what that button means to me, and I know that I can then control it, then I can make the changes that are significant in my life, and that button would just disappear. How great it would be if you could eradicate that button. Because I'm telling you that you can. The button does not have to be there as a representation of who you are. It is simply put there primarily because you do not understand it and you do not know what to do with it. Once we understand what it is, we can remove it. And later on, when I talk about emotional programming, I'll discuss what that actually means and how we can remove that button. So it's a good time to find a way to remove the button so that it doesn't impact your life anymore and doesn't affect any of those people around you. Just remember that. One of the most interesting questions that I'm ever asked, I think, is when anger is expressed, is it appropriate? Is it a legitimate emotion? I guess is one of the most primary things that people would say to me. And I think that there are a number of things that certainly indicate to us that anger is okay. As I said earlier, it's an emotion, just like any other emotion that we might have, and it's something which, as human beings, we experience no matter who we are. I don't think there's probably a person on this planet who at some particular point hasn't experienced a sense of anger. I certainly know that I have, and I know that on occasions I haven't probably behaved the best that I could have either, but I also know that I don't allow my anger to manifest itself on a regular basis in particular in ways that are unhelpful or damaging to other people. There's no way in the world I'd want to do something that damaged others as well. But is anger okay? Well, the answer is, quite frankly, yes it is. Anger is a healthy release of tension. It's how we feel, and it must be expressed in ways that are appropriate and that aren't going to harm other people. But it's a release of tension. It's an expression of our feelings, of actually stuff that is real to us that has great meaning. It's an assertion of self. It's a statement also of one's needs, values, and its limits, the extent to which we can go. It will tell us all of those things. It's a mode of connectedness to other people, because it's telling people exactly how we feel, sometimes about the way they're behaving that we find unhelpful. It's a motivator for change, because it indicates to us that we're uncomfortable with a certain experience and that change has to take place because of our own uncomfortableness. There are many things that have happened in this world which have been brought about because people have become angry about certain circumstances and decided that things need to change and that we need to find a way to make those things change. So it is a motivator to bring about significant change, not just in our own personal lives, but as a community. There are many things that have happened in our world which are about change, whether that be about racial discrimination, whether that be about climate change, whether that be about injustices that are done that we think in our community needs to move on, needs to shift, needs to be different. So there are many ways by which we can bring about change, and that is, and our anger sometimes is the driving force to bring about that particular change. It increases openness and intimacy. It builds better relationships where we can talk openly about how we feel and not hide how we feel, refuse to talk about how we feel, which is kind of like a male thing. But when we actually are able to talk about how we are able to feel at a deep level, it brings about significant change in terms of the relationships that we have. It's often a response also to over-structure when things are, when we, I don't know if any of you have been micromanaged, but sometimes when we're micromanaged, it's the sense that we're being dominated and we're being controlled and that sort of stuff. And sometimes it's about too much structure around us, too much stuff that limits us, that prevents our creativity sometimes from coming out, and that brings about an angry response. But it's also risky. It's risky to be angry because there are people that ought to express our anger, because people misinterpret perhaps sometimes what we choose to say about their behaviour. And we're going to talk about this when we do some work around how we should be assertive, or whether we're passive or whether we're passive aggressive, whatever. When we do that work, we'll talk a little bit about the riskiness of being able to talk to somebody about how their behaviour impacts you. It actually re-energises relationships because it is honest, and if done appropriately, it means that other people then have a better understanding as to who we are and why we behave the way that we do. And sometimes that is really, really helpful in relationships to open up new pathways for discussion, so that our deeper feelings, our anger, and all the stuff that sits around it can come out, so we can have those sorts of helpful conversations. It also enhances other people's feelings. So when we talk openly about how we feel, often people feel that they can engage with us around that, because they can also start to talk about how they feel about certain things, and sometimes even about how they feel about us. So in that respect, it does improve relationships. And of course, it also exposes one's vulnerability, because when we're starting to talk about our emotions, one of the things that really annoys me the most is that people will say that if I talk about how I feel, people will use that against me. Well, actually, that's not necessarily true. If people respect you, they will not use your emotional status or how you're feeling against you. They will not. And so if people do use that stuff against you, well, then clearly you shouldn't be having relationships with them. And we certainly should never feel vulnerable about talking about our emotions. And there's just one other thing I want to say about emotions, and that is that their emotions are vital to us. When you think about it, and I often ask clients this question, and in my groups I've been asking this question for years, if I could find a way to extract from you all your emotions, everything that you feel, what would be left? Just think about that for a moment. Write down your response. If I could extract from you everything that there was in you, emotionally and all your feelings, what would be left? I don't know what your response is, but look at what you've written. And it could fit into a number of categories, but primarily it could be about, I would be a cardboard cutout, a robot, one or two dimensional character. And it could be number one. You've probably got something that's a little bit different, but at the end of the day, it is extracting from us our soul. Our emotions are who we are. Without them, we're nothing. We are just a cardboard cutout. That's how important emotions are for us. They are the most significant part of our human experience, yet they're the least talked about aspect of who we are, because sometimes we believe that we will be vulnerable. So find a way to talk about them, to understand that talking about your anger is not a bad thing, and accepting that it's who you are. It's when it impacts others, when your behaviour, when your anger extends to behaviour that's going to harm others, then it's unhelpful, and only then is it unhelpful. But it's a good thing, and our feelings are just who we are. And I can't stress that enough, that we, particularly as men, struggle to connect with other people emotionally because we believe that we cannot talk about our emotions. Because when we do, it's going to uncover a whole host of stuff that sits below the anger about who we are. So we need to talk about it, and we need to find ways to have those conversations. So remember that anger, when we talk about it, is a positive thing. It's not negative, and it will enhance our relationships. It will make us feel better about who we are, and I tell you what, we'll find ways just to move on with our life a little bit more productively than perhaps the way we have in the past. So think about your emotions, remember that it's okay, and think about them in a positive way, particularly anger, providing we express it appropriately. And throughout this course, we'll talk about ways by which you can talk about and discuss emotions in a constructive manner. Now, I just wish to recap on a few of the things that we've been talking about, and then I've just got one additional bit to talk about, and then that'll be the end of this particular session, and you can just have a look now for the following session, which may be already up. I don't know how I've organised this, or it might be up at a later date, but just keep an eye out for it. And that is, when we're managing anger, there's a few things that we need to understand. Recognise and allow yourself to believe that anger is a natural, normal, healthy, non-evil human feeling. Everyone feels it. We just don't express it. So you needn't fear your anger. Remember that anger and aggression are not the same thing. Anger can be expressed assertively. Get to know yourself, so you recognise those events and behaviours which trigger your anger. As some say, find your own buttons, so you'll know when they're pushed. And as we described earlier, dispense with those buttons so they're no longer present. Learn to relax. If you have developed the skill of relaxing yourself, learn to apply this response when your anger is triggered. And there's something we talk about, which is some breathing exercises, which is about just calming yourself down. Diaphragmatic breathing, just breathing from down in your diaphragm, inhaling, feeling the diaphragm fill up, and just allowing a slow release. It's really important. Find ways to just relax when you know that you're being angry. But I think the most important thing is to allow yourself to feel that anger. It is natural that you feel angry. It's best, though, to try and find ways to understand that anger and how it's impacted you, and to ensure that you're behaving in ways around that anger that are not harming others. Just a few additional helpful hints that I think are really important for us to recognise as well. Develop assertive methods for expressing your anger. Be spontaneous. Don't wait and let it build up resentment. State it directly. Avoid sarcasm and innuendo. Use honest, expressive language. Avoid name-calling, put-downs, and physical attacks. Keep your life clear. Deal with issues when they arise, when you feel the feelings, not after hours, days, weeks of stewing about things. Go ahead, get angry, but develop a positive, assertive style for expressing it. You and those around you will appreciate it. These are really important facets of dealing and managing how we feel around our anger and how we choose to behave. We're going to talk in another session about being assertive and what assertive means. And we'll get you to do some exercises around assertiveness that I think will be really important to you as well. I just want to conclude with this, that there are some really destructive and unhelpful ways of dealing with anger. They are blaming others, being aggressive, interrogating, keep asking people questions over and over again, where were you, what were you doing, that sort of stuff. Sarcasm, ridicule, cynicism, viciousness, vindictiveness, criticism, sadism, and violence. These are all destructive ways of dealing with anger. Make sure that they're not a part of your life. I want to thank you for being with me in this particular week in this particular session, and just remember that there are future sessions to come that will help to reinforce what we've already talked about in terms of assertiveness, how to be different, the anger cycle and how that impacts men in particular. What we will be talking about is a range of ways by which you can better understand your sense of anger and how to react and respond around it that will ensure that other people in your life are safe. Look forward to seeing you during the next session.